Hi, this is Fabian Nicieza, and you're listening to The Nerd Byword.
Welcome into the Nerd Byword podcast, your primary source for all things nerdy. We have an extremely special guest for today's Byword Big Talk. Legendary comic book writer Fabian Nicieza joins us to talk about his current and past work, as well as his upcoming novel, Suburban Dicks. But first, Dave is at the news desk with a major development in the DCEU. What's going on in Metropolis, my friend?
So, as one legend ends, another begins, that's what it looks like when it comes to Superman. While Snyder's version of Superman, played by Henry Cavill, will take another bow when his cut of Justice League releases on HBO Max, it looks like a new theatrical Superman is already in the works. Variety is reporting that Ta-Nehisi Coates has been hired to write a new Superman movie, which will be produced by J.J. Abrams. According to the news release, Coates said, "To be invited into the DC Extended Universe by Warner Brothers, DC Films, and Bad Robot is an honor. I look forward to meaningfully adding to the legacy of America's most iconic mythic hero." Now, J.J. Abrams is actually no stranger to Superman, having penned a script titled Flyby back in the early 2000s. And well, it wasn't a great interpretation of Superman. Here, though, he's merely producing, which gives me some hope. Coates is, of course, no stranger to superheroes. He wrote Black Panther and Captain America at Marvel Comics, among other books, and to great acclaim. He's really the factor that makes this reboot so far the most interesting. There's obviously no director attached yet, no actor cast. Right now, all of my excitement rests on Coates. Of course, speculation has almost immediately sprung up online that Coates' version of Superman will be black. If so, great. There are already two versions of Superman that are black in the comics, including Val Zod and Calvin Harris. Perhaps it will be one of those. Perhaps Clark Kent will simply be black in this version. That's fine. I do think fans are putting the cart before the horse, though. Nothing in the original news release even hints at this story being the story of a black Superman. Although I, as a huge Superman fan, would totally welcome that, I think a wait-and-see approach is best right now. Look, in the end, I'm just excited we're getting a new version of Superman. Cavill was expertly cast, don't get me wrong, but Snyder's approach to the character did very little for me. Here's hoping that Coates captures the essence of the character. If he does, then, to paraphrase Michael Jackson, it don't matter if he's black or white. Chris, what do you think?
You just went there. So I'm super excited about this, and I totally echo your sentiments. I think a lot of people are just assuming because it's Ta-Nehisi Coates that it's going to be a black Superman, and that's kind of silly in my opinion, because he has written black characters with Black Panther, he's written white characters with Captain America. His Captain America is Steve Rogers, so he can do both. I think it's a little bit silly, but I'm excited in the quality of the team behind this. I have my druthers on some of J.J. Abrams' work, namely Rise of Skywalker, but by and large, the overt majority of his work I'm a fan of, and I can't say enough about Ta-Nehisi Coates. Even outside of his comics work that I've waxed poetic on, he is just a really unique mind. He is very precise in his social commentary and everything. So I'm very, very excited about this, and no matter if they bring Cavill back, which I've seen rumors to that as well that were unconfirmed. So whatever happens, I'm just glad that there is a good creative team behind it, because I feel like that's the primary source that we need in order to get good Superman content.
Yeah, exactly right. That's what I'm looking for, is great Superman content. And I'll have a little bit more to say about that later in the episode, but that's ultimately the goal. I love Superman. I want good Superman content. I don't care who delivers it, just give me good Superman. Now, Chris, we're going to stick around in the world of DC movies. What have you got?
Dave, so like this is your time to shine, okay? This new segment. Um, Blue Beetle is coming. After the initial announcement in 2018, the live action superhero film centered on the Jaime Reyes Blue Beetle is finally making some noise. Mexican screenwriter Gareth Dunay Alcocer has reportedly been working on the script since that initial announcement in 2018. But this week, the project took a major step forward when, according to The Wrap, Puerto Rican director Angel Manuel Soto was tapped to take on the role of director. Soto recently received a significant amount of acclaim for the 2020 indie hit Charm City Kings and said of the announcement, quote, "It is an honor to direct Blue Beetle, the first Latino superhero film for DC. I want to sincerely thank everyone at Warner Brothers and DC for trusting me to bring Jaime Reyes to life. I can't wait to make history together," end quote. Jaime Reyes, of Mexican-American heritage, is the third character in the DC universe to wield the mantle of Blue Beetle and first appeared in 2006's Infinite Crisis. He was co-created by Keith Giffen, John Rogers, and Cully Hamner. Reyes' story also radically changed the mythos surrounding the Scarab itself, trading in ancient magic in favor of alien and cosmic origins. Dave, you are big fans. We're both big fans of this character, myself from the Injustice video games, and I've started reading the John Rogers run a little bit on your recommendation. But between this and the Superman news, you have to be over the moon, right?
To a certain extent, yes. I mean, I'm hyped. I love Jaime Reyes. He's definitely one of the best additions to DC's pantheon of recent years. Seeing him in a big budget superhero movie would be amazing. But, and yes, there is a but. First, the writer and director both have produced predominantly serious fare, and obviously getting the cultural aspect of the character right is super important. The tone, though, is also part of what I love about the Blue Beetle. The best run on the character by far in the comic books was the very first one, written by John Rogers. He perfectly captured this almost ultimate Spider-Man-esque tone. There was great drama, but there was also great heart and great humor. The balance to get Jaime Reyes right is apparently quite tricky, and I don't think it has been captured by any of the subsequent Blue Beetle series. And trust me, I've tried. Every time they relaunch a Blue Beetle book with Jaime Reyes as the star, I'm right there trying to, recapture the magic. But so far, nobody in the comics at least seems to have quite gotten there. So right now, when it comes to Blue Beetle, I'm cautiously optimistic. But I'm also a little worried. If they don't capture the tone, the essence of that first run on the character, this could end up being another over-serious, dour misfire. And I really don't want, Zack Snyder's DC Part 2. So here's hoping Warner gets Blue Beetle right.
Yeah, that's my hope as well, and I think that's probably why I'm enjoying the comics that I'm reading in that run so far. My hope for this is in the article that I read on this was that it looks like a lot of DC's future focuses in the film franchise is going to be solo led feature films for one character. So my fingers are crossed that this is going to be like another Shazam or Aquaman, where particularly Shazam, where they bring that element of humor and in the case of Shazam, family, to really to make that human connection and that emotional connection, and hopefully they'll lean more into that.
See, I'll totally echo that. We need more Shazam, more Aquaman, and less whatever in the world they're doing with the Flash. We're just throwing everybody in there and the kitchen sink. So yeah, I hope that Blue Beetle is tightly focused on the main character and captures the essence of what made that first run by John Rogers so very good.
All right, that wraps up our DC heavy nerd news segment. Stick around after this. Our first break, we're going to be sitting down with Fabian Nicieza, co-creator of Deadpool and legendary comic book writer. Stick around. All right, welcome back, nerds. We are here with legendary comic book writer and novelist, Fabian Nicieza.
Yes. Es Fabian Nicieza. Hola, ¿cómo están
Yay!
todos?
Fabian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're gonna have to call me Fabian for the duration.
Okay, so
of
like, okay, I gotta quit my day job. Okay.
Only my mother called me Fabian, even when she was speaking English.
Se necesita un acento en la A.
Anybody who's going to be listening at home, just want to know, like, in advance, this is going to go off the rails real fast. As in, it already has. Here we go.
Okay, all right, let's try it again. Fabian, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
It's my pleasure, guys. Thank you for having me.
So we always like to start our interviews, as any good comic nerd would love, a good origin story. So what's the thing that sparked your interest in comics and the nerd world at large?
Okay, I've told my origin story so many times. I worry that I need to come up with a new one. It's the kind of typical immigrant little boy story, I guess. I came to this country when I was 4 years old. My brother's 3 years older than I am. We lived in New York City in Queens. He saw Batman and Superman comics on the newsstand rack and recognized them because we'd been watching the Batman and Superman TV shows in Argentina in 1966. But this was the 1950s Superman show reruns and the 1940s Batman movie serial reruns in black and white on Argentinian TV. Not the show that was running back then with Adam West. We saw that real quick and we were like, oh my god. So my brother bought some comics and asked my parents if we could, and we didn't have a lot of money when we first came to this country, but they were willing to fork over the whopping 12 cents for a comic book because they just wanted us to shut up basically. And my brother and I just started learning how to read and write English a lot faster from reading the comics, and both of us drew because my father was an engineer, but he was very artistically inclined. He did a lot of sculpture work and clay work, and painting too, and he encouraged us to draw, even if it was those silly superhero things. And that's it. We just started reading comics in late '66, early '67, and at some point, a classmate of my brother's told him, "You shouldn't be reading those comics. You should be reading these cool comics." And of course, it was Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and Marvel stuff. So my brother, wanting to fit in America, because we didn't want to get kicked out of the country or anything like that, that's only the kind of thing you do nowadays, really. But back then we were afraid, so we got Marvel comics instead. And truly, yes, they were better at that time. So we just started to get really into Marvel and started getting Spider-Man and Fantastic Four. And then I discovered Avengers and realized that for the same price, you can get 7 or 8 heroes in one book rather than just like one or four. So I started getting Avengers, and that became a continuous purchase for me from 1968 until I got a job at Marvel Comics in 1985. Then I got them I got them for free. I always got to throw that in there just to piss people off. I started getting them for free, so I didn't have to buy them anymore. There you go.
Now, since you mentioned Spider-Man, as members, both of us, of the #Drunk Pete family, we would really be remiss if we didn't get you to tell us a little bit about the backstory. How did you accomplish this feat that's never been done before or since, which is to get Peter Parker drunk in Web of Spider-Man number 38?
I was just trying to sell inventory stories, and if for any listeners who don't know, inventory stories were something that Marvel was doing back then, that you had to have a completed issue in your drawer. Every editor needed to have a completed issue in their drawer, um, penciled, lettered, inked, colored, because when the schedule fell down, and it always fell down, you had to have a book ready to go. It wasn't like nowadays where you could have a book miss shipping, and often do have books miss shipping, because back then, still a huge chunk of our sales were through newsstand, and you couldn't miss that newsstand delivery date, or you lost the rack space for the month. So we got our books out on time, and if we couldn't get our regular team to get the book done on time, an inventory story was always ready. So it was always a good way for new talent to try to break in. A lot of assistant editors would try to sell inventory stories, and the first story I sold was a Cyforce story, which was an inventory story, even though it got published immediately. um, and I wanted to do a Spider-Man. I wanted to sell a Spider-Man story, and it was a quirky break in a way. my first actual sale at Marvel had been a Spider-Man inventory story. The editor Jim Owsley, who you know is Christopher Priest, the writer, um, he purchased a plot pitch that I gave him. I wrote up the plot, and then it never got sent out to an artist to draw, and I didn't know that. And then Jim got fired, and a new editor came in. Jim Salicrup took over the Spider-Man books, and Jim Salicrup didn't like my story, and he killed it. Basically, he said, well, I'm not going to send this to an artist. We're not going to do it. They just take it. You get what's called a kill fee, which is you get paid basically 2/3 of your total writing rate for the entire issue, whereas a plot by itself is normally 1/3 of the writing rate. Your full issue and script is 2/3. So it was kind of a great learning experience. My first printed sale could have been a Spider-Man book, but it wasn't. It was a good story, quite honestly. It still is to this day. He just didn't like it because it dealt with a nun who was who was being an undercover vigilante to a certain extent, and Spider-Man's conundrum and dilemma because he knows her identity and doesn't know if he should reveal it. Because how would he like it if someone revealed his? So that was his can't must conflict for the issue. But that's water under the bridge anyway. So I guess Jim might have felt like just 5% guilty that he had killed my first sale, but I'd already sold a few stories by that point to the New Universe books. And he asked me if I wanted to send them some more pitches because the Spider-Man books always needed inventory story help. So they would burn through their drawer quota pretty quickly because they had 3 titles at the time. I gave him a bunch of pitches, and he bought 2 of them, and one of them was the Hobgoblin story where Peter gets drunk. And he had no problem whatsoever with the premise because he understood that Pete didn't do it on purpose, and it was and he didn't mean to, but it presented an interesting conflict for the character in the issue, Jim thought. And he said if I wrote up the plot, he'd have to get it approved, and he wanted to make sure that I wrote the plot first because he thought that would help him get it approved. So he was pretty upfront that Tom DeFalco may say no. And Tom read it and said, "This is no problem. This is fine." And that was it. It was not a big deal. It was not a giant thing. He wasn't shooting heroin or anything like that. He wasn't running a meth lab out of his apartment. He accidentally got buzzed because he drank spiked punch and he didn't know it. But I did it because I thought it was a fun bit that hadn't been done before, and an interesting twist. B, he was relatively close to my age at that time. I was actually a couple of years older than Peter Parker at that point. I think I was like 27 when I sold that story, 26, and Peter was in his 25 or 24-ish. We would nebulously define it. So we would go out after work and drink more than we should and get buzzed and take the train home and whatever. So I just thought it was a very natural thing for a young guy in New York City to get drunk. He just happens to be Spider-Man. And that was it. It wasn't a big deal. A lot of people in the office read it and thought it was cute. They had no problems with it. It's a pretty innocuous little story. It's not earth-shattering. It's only you morons that turned it into this titanic, fascinating thing that it's become. It really wasn't in its time. The most memorable thing about that issue for most people was not that Pete got drunk. It was that the cover that Bob Budiansky drew was so fantastic. The Hobgoblin cover is great. And that's what most people remember about that book, not the actual story itself.
Yeah, so I kind of feel ill prepared not having any spiked punch for this interview. But
yeah, you know what, I was gonna get a bourbon for this, but I just decided no, I was in too foul a mood coming in, so let me just stick to water.
we're already probably rip roaring and ready to go without any spiked punch. Although I will let it be said, Mr. and Mrs. Muggins, if anybody was running a meth lab out of that Chelsea apartment, it was them.
I don't disagree at all. I always thought that there was some sort of a child pornography ring story that could come out of that couple. I don't know. It was Mr. Muggins who ultimately spiked the punch, wasn't it? Yeah. I think I might have honestly been thinking about Mr. and Mrs. Roper to a certain extent, like that kind of a dysfunctional married couple that had been married for 150 years, kind of a thing. It worked. It was fine. It was look at that point, just getting to do. I ended up writing. I ended up having two Spider-Man stories printed within 2 months of each other. Two Web of Spider-Man issues. Didn't I think I also wrote 30. I wrote 36 and 38 or something like that. Um, I did the Meteor Man story too, the Looter. And that was I think that was the first one that printed. The Drunk Pete story was the second one that printed. And I always loved Spider-Man. I mean, I got to write within months of selling my first story to Marvel. I got to write the character that got me into Marvel to begin with, which was Spider-Man. You know, it was pretty cool.
So I would have to say that Spider-Man is my biggest fandom, but right behind that, it would be the Merry Mutants of Marvel. So the X-Men line was really in a big state of flux after the abrupt departure of Chris Claremont, until you and Scott Lobdell, between the adjectiveless X-Men and Uncanny, you really came along and put together a really underappreciated run of that era. And taking over for an individual like Claremont is not exactly enviable as a task. How did you guys go about solidifying what you wanted to do with that line?
We, those are all. It's a very complicated question because you asked three questions in one, and it's not. It didn't take place over the span of a week. It took place over the span of a few years because you may have thought of it was an abrupt departure on Chris's part, but anybody who was on the inside at Marvel knew that this had been building and percolating for quite a while, well over a year and a half. So. Uh, I already had gone through my holy crap, I'm writing the X-Men and Chris isn't phase when I was brought in to script over one of his plots on an issue of X-Men, Uncanny, which was the first time anybody's name had been in the writing credits other than his for years. And then I wrote the next issue because he refused to finish the storyline. I didn't know that at the time. I was told he was going to be on vacation. That was the editor's go-to to make me not have a moral quandary about it. He did the same thing to me when he asked me to script an issue of New Mutants. He told me Louis Simonson was on vacation and he needed it done, and the deadline was a killer. So I scripted it, and later I found out that he wanted to see how I would script over the issue. Anyway, so I wrote. I scripted issue 278, and then I wrote issue 279, which was like the conclusion of a Shadow King storyline. It was the first time that Chris's name had not been in the writer's box of an X-Men book in 17 years or something like that. So I'd already gone through that, and it was difficult and interesting and challenging. I like and respect Chris a lot. I've known his wife since I worked with her at Berkeley Publishing in the early '80s before she'd even married Chris. So I didn't want to step on his toes. I wanted to respect him, but by the same token, there were struggles going on between him and the editor. As a reader, I myself had lots of issues with some of the things he had been doing, and I wasn't enjoying the book as a reader the way I had been in years past. But that was understandable too, because I'd gone through ebbs and flows enjoying the X-Men anyway. When the image now when Chris was released from the X-Men and he got the first three issues of the new book, it was kind of a respectful parting gift in a way because we knew that it was a huge payday that he was going to be getting for doing those three issues. I thought there was a possibility that I might be asked to continue working on the books after he left, but Bob decided to go with John Byrne's scripting over Wilson and Jim's plots and pencils. I knew that wasn't going to last very long. So I just said, if Bob wants to ask me, he can ask me. I didn't have a burning, driving desire to write the X-Men. My emotional connection to the book had kind of really dried up many years earlier. So even though it was Marvel's number one selling book, I didn't have if you'd offered me X-Men or Avengers, I would have taken Avengers in a second. I would have much rather have written Avengers because I still remained having a more emotional connection to Avengers than I did to X-Men. So when he asked Byrne to write it, I was actually a little frustrated. I was like, all right, fine, screw it. Well, it's going to blow up. Watch it blow up. And it did blow up in just a few months. And there was this wonderful moment where Bob comes into my office because I was an editor at that point. So he comes into my editorial office, and it was well after hours, had to be after 6. And he comes in and he says, "I need you to script. Can you script an issue of X-Men overnight?" I was like, "Overnight? What?" He's like, "Yeah, dude, blah 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 blah." I'm not going to go into the details of why, but I just go, "No, I can't. I'm here late because I'm going out after work, and I can't. I'm not. I can't. No." And part of me was thinking, certainly not to bail you out for burn, or to bail burn out. I'm not going to do that, and as we were talking, Bob's facing me, and my desk faced the window, the wall, which was all window. The walls of the editorial offices were all windows back then, and so we could look out over the bullpen, and so that they can make sure we weren't doing things we shouldn't be doing in the offices, because that had been a bit of an editorial problem before they did the redesigns. So as I'm talking to Bob, behind him, walking down the hallway, heading towards, I think, Terry Kavanaugh's office to deliver Marvel Comics Presents scripts, was Scott Lobdell. And I pointed behind Bob's shoulder to the window, and he turned around just as Scott was walking by, and he turned back to me and he goes, "No." And I go, "Yes." And he goes, "No." And I go, "Yes, Scott's gonna be able to do it overnight, and he's gonna do a good job. Go ask him." And Bob just goes, "All right." And he went and asked him. So in essence, I was plunging a dagger into my own back without realizing it, because Scott did all 22 pages overnight. He did a really good job, because he was working his ass off back then. And then once the Image stuff finally shook out and the guys were going to be leaving, finally going to be leaving, because that took a while too. Bob had asked me to do a two-part inventory story, just to basically make sure that we had a schedule gap for whenever Jim was going to be done, because we didn't know exactly when Jim was going to be done still. So I did a two-part story, which was what RT Bear was drawing, which turned into issues 12 and 13. And then, because the Image guys left at such short notice, tight timing-wise, to an already scheduled crossover, which had no story yet and had nothing broken down or plotted out yet. Um, Basically, I stepped up and said, "Here's an outline for the crossover we have to do, which we don't know what it's going to be." And Bob said, "Okay, this works. We're going to make changes." I said, "Of course, yeah." And that was it. That got the ball rolling. So Bob assigned me on X-Men, assigned Scott on Uncanny. I took over X-Force, which I already knew was going to happen whenever Rob was going to leave. And he brought in Larry Hama, I think, on Wolverine, or Larry was already on Wolverine. He brought Peter David in on X Factor. And Executioner Song was the first thing we had to do right off the bat immediately, because the schedule, the budget had already had a crossover plan for it, and the numbers that increase as a result of the crossover help drive your quarterly budget. So that quarter, I think it's the third quarter for Marvel, was July, August, September. That quarter had a planned crossover in it, and we had to have something there, and that was Executioner Song. It turned into Executioner Song real fast. I handed in an outline, and a week later we were already having an editorial summit meeting with the X group, everybody introducing themselves, getting to know each other better, seeing what we wanted to do with the books, where we wanted to go with the characters. And that was it. We just got the ball rolling. And for me, it wasn't any sort of tremendous triumph or exhilaration. It was, I felt at the time, as much as anything, that I was trying to do something to help support my company, because I was pretty damn entrenched in Marvel on an administrative, uh, corporate level, as I was as a writer. So I felt I had a vested interest in ensuring the company's success, because it also meant ensuring my own success. Obviously, if the books I work on sell, I'm making more money. And the Image stuff was, it was a need of the groin, and an understandable need of the groin. I never begrudged them having the desire to do what they did. I respected the living daylights out of them having the desire to do what they did. I didn't really necessarily like the way many of them went about doing it, because there was a lot of really unnecessary backstabbing and the cutting of hamstrings going on. It's the Bill Murray from Caddyshack thing. If you cut the gophers or if you cut the golfer's hamstrings, he'll never play golf again. So I felt like they were trying to cut our hamstrings so that we'd never be able to make comics again. And we just wanted to prove that, yeah, we could still make comics and they're still going to sell really, really well. And they did, and we did. So they got what they wanted, and we got pretty much what we wanted, and everything just kept rolling right after that. The books sold tremendously well. I was never a happy cog in that X wheel, but the books made me a lot of money, and unfortunately, I let it ride a lot longer than I should have because I was making so much doing them. But at the same time, I also thought that I was doing a lot for my company too.
Now, you were also part of the creative team behind Age of Apocalypse, and let me tell you, my buddy Kris here, that's probably his favorite comic book event of all time, and he finds it to be basically the gold standard
I'm so
for.
happy for Kris. Age of Apocalypse is and always will be not a positive experience for me. So I'm glad that Kris liked them. Everyone's allowed to like mediocre comics that are dressed up in really funky, fancy ways. I didn't. I was not happy with Age of Apocalypse because we had I was not involved in the breakdown of the story at all. I was not involved in the framework of it. I think you can really, if you look very closely, you can tell because it's a complete mess more than halfway of the way through. We had a very good, interesting beginning, but we never had an end, and they were making the end up as they were going along without any real clear knowledge of what that end was going to be until very close to the last minute. So as a result, it wasn't a good writing experience for me because I don't like to work that way. I don't like that level of spontaneity because often I feel it turns into desperation, and Bob and Scott thought desperation brought out great ideas, and I thought desperation usually brought out a mess. And I always think of Age of Apocalypse as a mess. It's impossible for me to reread all the books, like what was it, like 8 titles with 4-issue miniseries. I was just like, forget it. There's no. But I also do respect that for a lot of people that might have been between the ages of 10 and 16 or 10 and 18 at the time. Of course, those books are going to be phenomenal, and they're going to be exciting, and they're going to be interesting, and you're going to have a huge emotional attachment to them in the same way that I have a huge emotional attachment to Engelhart Shooter, Avengers time period, and Jim Starlin's Captain Marvel and things like that. Because that's when I was of age that I would form that emotional man boy bond to the material. But I think that the story itself just became a mess, and it wasn't pleasant to work with. You got to realize I got fired up from X-Force in the middle of Age of Apocalypse, so I knew that I wasn't going to be coming back to X-Force while I was writing the middle of Gambit and the Externals. The writers were waiting to find out what we had to do to keep the crossover moving because we didn't have it broken down beyond the middle. So each of the last 2 issues on each of my 2 miniseries were done piecemeal, like 5, 6, 8 pages at a time, because you didn't know what you were setting stuff up for, you didn't know what you were resolving. So it just was not a pleasant experience for me. And I say that with the caveat that I completely get why it would be for readers. So we, Kris, have respectfully very different views on the Age of Apocalypse.
Okay, let me ask you this then, because that's very, very interesting, kind of getting behind the curtain. Look at that. You came back and did a mini in 2015 centered in that universe during the whole Secret Wars timeline. How was that different? Were you able to tell your own story and kind of do it differently?
Yeah, I mean it's apples and oranges. They're two completely different creatures. They asked me if I'd be interested in doing not a remake of Age of Apocalypse, but the idea of of that story world within the context of the Secret Wars story world. Um, and I thought the new Secret Wars storyline was a bit of a mess too. It was a bit of a it was a just like the original Age of Apocalypse. It was a kind of a fun, glorious mess, but it was a bit of a mess. And I just was able to do a pocket miniseries because it took place in a pocket part of the Secret World. The good thing about Secret Wars is that everything was its own little land mass, right? Everything was its own little fiefdom, so you can tell your story in your little fiefdom and not worry too much about what was going on everywhere else. And they kind of encouraged not having your fingers dip into other pies. So I was able to tell a simple little 4-part story. But it was what it was. It's a mediocre series. My fun out of it. The only fun I really got out of that, for the most part, was getting to play with Adam X and aspects of what I had wanted to do with Adam X through turning him into Burner in that miniseries.
Oh God, we're gonna get to that, I promise. Um, so you mentioned this earlier, but you had a falling out at Marvel in '95, and you ended up leaving to do work with DC and Acclaim Comics, even rising to the editor in chief there. Um, what happened?
Uh, First of all, I didn't rise to editor in chief. I was hired as editor in chief, but okay. We'll take a step back. What happened is that I there was there was too much going on that I wasn't happy with, not the least of which was my own work. I needed to scale back on the amount of work I was doing because I had burnt myself out. Um, I wasn't able to do a few stories that I felt I had earned the right to do, and that really annoyed me. There were editorial changes coming, and I was not going to be a part of those changes the way I had been wholly and completely led to believe every step of the way that I was going to be. So all of that basically, and I had my first kid in '94. So all of those things, all churning at the same time over a 1 year period, made me just go, you know what? I'm taking a walk. It's time to. I've been here 10 years. It's time to just see what else is out there. And Steve Masarsky at Valiant Acclaim had offered me an executive editor position there, and I said no because I did not want to go there under the parameters of Bob Layton still being the editor in chief. I had no interest in that. So about 10 months later, he came back to me and said, I'm ready to offer you the editor in chief job. And that was in '96. And I said, okay. And I took the job mostly because I wanted to be an editor in chief and run a comic book company. But, I should have done better due diligence because I had no awareness whatsoever that, that Valiant Acclaim was in such a doghouse with the readers and the retailers. Um, if I'd done better homework before I took the job, I very well may not have taken the job. But it was still a really good learning experience for me, that 2 year period. I learned a tremendous amount. Masarsky left after a year, so I became president and publisher of the company. So I'm learning not only a lot about running a company, but I got to sit here and negotiating vending machine contracts and making toy sales pitches and Hollywood pitches, so and licensing stuff. And so I'm getting a tremendous amount of experience and exposure to the business side of things. And I'd gotten a lot of that at Marvel, but it was mostly in the creation and the presentation of business related stuff. It wasn't necessarily in the legal and contractual aspect of it. So it was a nice little bookend between the experience I got in the office at Marvel over 10 years and the experience I got at Acclaim in 2 years. I left very prepared for any kind of an office job and subsequently didn't take an office job again for like another 10 years. um, that was mostly the Acclaim thing was mostly to get the opportunity to do what I had wanted to do at Marvel, which is to be editor in chief. I'm very lucky I didn't become editor in chief at Marvel since they were going to be gutting editorial and gutting the line and gutting everything. And that's one reason why I may have been taken out of the candidacy of editor in chief because I would have fought that every single step of the way until they proved to me financially why it was necessary. Um, and that was it. So I did Acclaim for 2 years. I closed the company in New York down. I moved because we were not financially viable, and I didn't want to keep playing a game with the parent company that we were financially viable, which had been going on for a while. And I left in summer of '98, not having a clue what I was going to do next. So I walked out the door from Acclaim corporate headquarters in Glen Cove, New York, on a Friday. And on a Monday, Mark Powers at Marvel called me up and asked me if I wanted to write a Gambit monthly series. And I was like, yeah, okay, I guess, sure, why not? I had no, I had no idea what I was going to do next. I actually was probably would have been better served taking a few months off, because Acclaim had been pretty traumatic. Having to lay off 23 people who are your friends is not easy, and having to close down an office is not easy. Um, so I took the Gambit job, and that was it. I was a freelance writer again, sort of. I'd never really actually been a freelance writer solely up until that point. I'd always done my writing while I had a staff job. So '98 was the first time I was actually a freelance writer, period. Um, and that was it. Just started writing whatever they offered and whatever interested me. I would pitch sometimes too, but mostly it was always waiting on a call or an offer. So I wrote Gambit, and then I got the Thunderbolts book after Kurt was going to leave. I wrote each of those for quite a while. I did a little bit of work here and there for DC, and then I got the Cable and Deadpool book in 2004.
Now at DC, you famously worked with Mark Waid to relaunch the Justice League with Midsummer's Nightmare, which would, lead into Grant Morrison's run. So many fans still fondly remember this whole JLA relaunch, including myself. I got Midsummer's Nightmare, the trade paperback, sitting on my shelf right now. Why do you think fans still so fondly remember this era of the Justice League?
Because it was the first time that the original seven had been back together again in quite a long time. Um, quite a long time, I'm pretty sure. And it was just the original seven, wasn't it, for at least the first year of Grant's run, I think. Um, Grant is a very cool writer who does very cool things. So he does stuff that manages to excite the straightforward mainstream superhero readers, and then at the same time he does stuff that attracts and draws from the more esoteric cool kid crowd, who might normally prefer a Vertigo book or an indie book or something like that, or a mature reader's book that has words in it like fuck and shit. Those are very mature reader books. So Grant does some cool stuff, and I think that the combination of launching the original seven back into the book through a miniseries setup, because Grant wanted to hit the ground running. That's the only reason the miniseries even existed. Grant did not want to do the legwork that explained why the seven were getting back together again. So Mark and I ended up doing that story and we knew we weren't going to be writing a monthly book. I didn't know who was going to be writing the book when I was originally first starting on Midsummer Nightmare, but I knew it wasn't going to be me, and I knew it wasn't going to be Mark. So when I found out it was Grant, I went, "Oh, that's interesting, cool." And that was it. That was all. That was before Acclaim, though, guys. That was like '95-ish into '96. I'm pretty sure Midsummer Night's Mare came out in '95 or '96, and then Grant's new JLA started right afterwards. And I totally get why fans are going to fall for it. And I was not surprised in the least that it was such a hugely successful book for DC at a time when so many other things were struggling. That core seven has a little bit of a, Seven Samurai, Magnificent Seven kind of a feel to it, even down to the Justice League animated uh, theme song that had the characters walking with the sun in the background and their silhouettes as they're slow mo walking, and you're thinking, Hawk Girl, Superman, Green Lantern, why aren't you guys just flying? Why are you walking? So it has that kind of a dusty Western iconic tumbleweed rolling across the ground kind of feel to it. So I think that if they were to go back to that again at any point, after a lapse of not having that for a while, 5 years or more, you'll get that same kind of excitement, I think, out of readers. Even though by that point they'll all be in their 50s and 60s, you're still going to get that same kind of excitement because I think those seven together kind of um, connote a level of mythology that is appropriate to that book, and also, quite honestly, very difficult to sustain in the long run, which is why you always have to bring in other characters and mix the team up and all that stuff. It's hard to continue to propel stories that contain the mythos necessary for those seven to be together.
Okay, so since you've spent time writing the JLA yourself, what are your thoughts on the upcoming release of Zack Snyder's Justice League on HBO
The hell you
Max?
guys asking me? You guys are just asking me this crap so that you can try to get a controversial poll quote for you to tweet it out.
We've already
Um,
made our bed and we have to lie in it. To be fair,
I am not a huge fan of Zack Snyder's superhero DC movies. I am pretty clearly on the record saying that. That being said, I have seen every single movie that Zack Snyder has ever directed. So it's not that I am unfair to him as a director. It is that I don't think he understands what it is about these characters that resonate and make people want to aspire to be them. Um, as a result, I do not like his movies when he has DC superheroes in them. I did not like Man of Steel. I liked Batman versus Superman tremendously less than I liked Man of Steel, and I didn't like Man of Steel. And Justice League was just a mess. So I have actually tremendous curiosity to watch this 4 hour megalith of a movie that he is putting out on HBO Max in just a few weeks, isn't it? I am going to watch every single minute of it. I do not expect to like much of it, but I will absolutely watch it. Um, I think he is a director that is worthy of tremendous attention and respect, but that doesn't mean I think he's a director that always tells a good story. Um, he is a remarkable visualist. He has some beautiful things that he puts on screen, but it's not often in service to a good, well constructed, entertaining story.
yeah, you said that a lot more diplomatically than I would have. I am
I got nothing.
excited.
People turn this into something personal. It's really strange to me
Yeah,
that
it's just yeah,
so many people who have never met Zack Snyder
yeah.
feel the desperate need to defend Zack Snyder, and so many people who've never met Zack Snyder feel the tremendous need to rag on Zack Snyder. And I'm just sitting here going, I don't know the guy. I just look at the movie. That's all. And I see some absolutely gorgeous things, and I see some things that make me go, huh? And that's all. And oftentimes with his movies, more of it makes me go, huh, than makes me like it. I liked 300 a lot. I actually liked Watchmen. I don't think it was great or nothing, but I liked it. I thought it was a solid B grade movie for me. But you know, I didn't like Sucker Punch, but I'm not going to deny that Sucker Punch doesn't have some really great visuals and some great set design and stuff like that. I didn't like Man of Steel, but there's also some beautiful imagery in that movie. It's just in service to a very poor movie, very poor script. So I wonder sometimes, is it him as a visualist, or is it the scripts that he chooses to work with or work from? Um, I don't know the answer to that, and as a result, I can't judge it one way or the other. I just judge the movie as a whole as a viewer, and it's my own subjective, personal interpretation of it. And I have just as much a right to my own subjective interpretation of Zack Snyder's movie as you have your subjective interpretation of a comic book I wrote that you read. You know what I mean? It's all the same thing,
Yeah.
you know? Just because I'm a professional writer doesn't mean I can't have a subjective personal opinion about art that I see. I try to be diplomatic about how I say it because I do respect the creative process.
Yeah, so like in contrast, like he has a new movie coming on Netflix, like I think it's called Army of the Dead, and that looks, fantastic. That looks super exciting. It seems on brand. It's just hard for me to think of Superman, this paragon of hope and you know, visions of like what we should be aspiring to be, like you said, and that's just not what I get from those movies.
Well, I mean, I think he is on record or has discussed that he has Randian views and Randian views, and people who tend to come from that school of thought do not believe in selfless acts and selfless heroism. They always think that there is an inherent selfishness to the actions of man, so it's going to be almost impossible for someone who comes into it with that viewpoint to be able to look at Superman and go, why would this guy willingly do anything good for others when he's so powerful he can do anything he wants for himself? And that the dichotomy of that thought is what ends up twisting the reality and the DNA of who Superman is. You know, and when you have a father who tells a son not to rescue him from a tornado, forget it. You're up Shit's Creek. You're dead. It's going to be really hard for you to attain that noble, aspirational, help humankind sort of a mentality when your dad has already told you maybe you shouldn't have saved your school friends from that bus that fell into the water, and maybe you shouldn't save me from a tornado, even though you could in 2 seconds. So I guess that the Snyderverse version of Clark is a little bit flawed in how he views the world.
Now, you also were involved in DC's Convergence event, which revisited, various eras in DC history.
Just pulling this crap out of your ass. Out of your ass, you're pulling this crap. Yes, go ahead.
And in working on that series, and as a fan yourself, is there a particular era in DC Comics history that you like the best?
My favorite era of DC Comics history is probably 78 to 85, pre-crisis. Um, um, JLA with Jerry Conway and George Perez leading into even the Detroit JLA, which I loved. I know I'm in the minority, but I love the Detroit JLA. George Perez and Marv Wolfman on Teen Titans. Late 70s covers Englehart and Rogers on Batman. Early 80s covers Jerry Conway and Doug Mensch and Don Newton, who's one of my favorite artists and favorite Batman artists ever, working on Batman and Detective. That's probably my favorite era. Um, Although I love Superman. Superman never excited me as a reader because I couldn't get into Kurt Swan's artwork. But there were several issues of Action Comics and several Superman specials or annuals that were drawn by Gil Kane, which totally drew me in, and I loved them. I loved Gil Kane's Superman work. And Marv Wolfman was writing a bunch of Action Comics that Gil Kane was drawing. Those were some really, really fun issues. That's when they remade Brainiac and they remade Luthor's armor and stuff like that. So for me, that was my favorite period. I know Crisis was super exciting, but that's just as I was starting to work at Marvel, and I was starting to read it more critically as a professional than I was as a reader, and that changed my perspective a bit. The ramifications of Crisis were a bit of a cluster F. They were a little messed up. They did not seamlessly and smoothly segue out of Crisis into their monthly books. So even though John Byrne on Superman was exciting, the world itself, the DC universe itself, was a little confused in 86, 87, 88 in terms of their mainstream continuity. They were still doing great stuff like Alan Moore Swamp Thing stuff, and it was still going on, I think. And they had Watchmen come out and all that. So they had a lot of good stuff. But for me as a fanboy, it's 78ish to 85.
So with so much time spent working on Bat Family titles like Robin, Red Robin, Nightwing, several Batman stories, do you have a favorite Bat character that you enjoy writing the most?
Dick Grayson is my favorite character in comics, always has been. Um, I got to write him a couple times in his monthly book, and then I got to write him several times as Batman. I think I'm the only person, possibly, No, maybe not. Now that Dan Jurgens was just writing the Rick Grayson stuff, I think before Dan Jurgens took over, after I left the book and Scott left the book, the Nightwing book, I think I was the only person in comics who had written Dick Grayson as Robin, as Nightwing, as Batman, and as Rick Grayson. so, so I had that going for me, baby. I just have always liked Dick Grayson since I was 7 years old. I watched the TV show and I thought, I can't be Batman. He's an adult, but I could be Robin. And that little 6-year-old mentality stuck with me. I could be Robin. That's cool. And I always liked them, always. And sporadically got some Titans issues uh, pre the Marv Wolfman George Perez launch, and sporadically would get some detective stuff where he had backups in it in the book, and I could never find it consistently or regularly. I got a bunch of Batman family stuff whenever I saw he was in it, but it was really Teen Titans that really, when Marvin George launched that book, that really re-cemented, kind of re-established how much I like that character and why. And it remains to this day. It's odd. It's a childish thing. It's the whim of a 6-year-old to latch onto a character and stick with it. But Dick Grayson's a character that's really lucky in that he's had several really good writers write several really good runs with him. The Wolfman Teen Titans stuff, followed by the Chuck Dixon solo book. You're dealing with some long runs there that really get you an opportunity to watch the maturation of a character in a really interesting, exciting way. So he's always been my number one. Always will be. Always will be till the day I die. He'll be the one.
He's your Antonio Banderas.
He is my Antonio Banderas and Zorro. Yes, he is.
I absolutely love that you said Dick Grayson, because I have a little bit of sidekick fever. Anyways, as a kid, I always identified more with the sidekicks.
Yeah, I always liked the
And
sidekick characters. Look at me, I wrote New Warriors, for crying out loud. I always liked the sidekick characters, always.
and he is just, I mean, he's the original and in a lot of ways still the best. So I wholeheartedly echo that. He's probably my favorite Bat character as well.
And I'm sorry, no offense to Tim Drake, who I've gotten to write quite a bit, and obviously, I love writing that character because I think I've done a really good job with him, and could have done an even better job if I'd had more time with him. But I like Tim Drake tremendously from the moment of his introduction through his solo book that Chuck Dixon wrote. I've always liked Tim Drake, but Dick is still number one.
Now, you're writing X-Men Legends for Marvel, a book that is being billed as a story nearly 30 years in the making. So, what made you want to tell this story? Was it something that you pitched to Marvel? Did they approach you? What was the genesis of that?
It's kind of a weird combination of both. I never got a chance to tell the miniseries story that I wanted to tell. I laid in a subplot that the editor really liked. I introduced a character that the editor ended up not liking. I get why he didn't like it because I don't think I introduced him well enough the first few appearances he had, but I did it badly on I did it on purpose, not that I did it badly on purpose, but I did it on purpose to introduce him in a bombastic way because I knew where I wanted to go with him. And in order to get where I wanted to go with him, I thought it would have the most character arc if I introduced him in an over the top way, leading towards the maturation and the importance of the character and what he would find where he would find his place, and getting to that place was the story. So I ironically I pitched him like knowing that in the first act he's an imbecile and an ass and over the top, but I'm doing that because I know by the end of the third act he's the boy who would be king. You know what I mean? And when you never get a chance to show your second or third act, all everyone's ever going to look at is the first act, and they're going to go, "Wow, that's really stupid," and you're going to be like, "Well, I guess it is, but let me tell you, the second and third act would have been kind of okay." And that was the for 25 years that was always the shrug of my shoulders, which was I never got to show a second and third act, and I knew what they were all along. I had enough notes on the outline of the original miniseries still in notebooks down in my basement that, quite frankly, I was able to pitch it without a problem because I knew what my beginning, middle, and end were going to be. When Mark Basso called me about X-Men Legends, I had just finished up Juggernaut. It was well received at Marvel. The editors, the people there were talking about it positively, and they knew they were launching X-Men Legends. So Mark contacted me and asked me, "Would you like to pitch 3 issues, um, probably for the first year, 3 issues, a two-parter and a one-parter? If you have any stories you didn't get a chance to tell," and I laughed. I said, "Every story is a story I didn't get a chance to tell in the X-Men." But the question is, 25 years later, do I still want to tell those stories? And I, before I said yes to him, because I never say yes to most anything that Marvel asks me to do without serious contemplation for fear of not being happy. I said, let me look through some stuff and then get back to you. So I read through, I not read through, I flipped through my entire run of X-Men, trying to remember where there were stories that I didn't get to tell or where I wanted to go with it. And I realized there were not that many. There just were not that many stories that I felt an emotional connection to want to go back to revisit. So the only stories I had were Adam X and a couple others. That's it. And I pitched him Adam X as the two-parter, and then I pitched him 3 different self-contained story ideas because I knew that I'd originally thought about doing that with that, and I had originally thought about doing this with during that Sinister issue, and and that was it. So he got back to me and he said yes to the Adam X two-parter. That was the only two-parter I pitched him, and I said, if you don't like it, I just won't do a two-parter. I'll do 1 issue and that'll be it. And he said yes to the Adam X, and I said, this is confirming what was going to be. And he goes, "Yeah, no, we know that, we understand." I go, "You realize," I was trying to talk my way out of it almost every step of the way. You realize that if we do this, he's going to officially be a brother. "Yep, we know that, it's okay." I was like, "Oh my God, please give me a reason to say no." So that was it. And I said my biggest dilemma is going to be taking 88 pages of original story content and bringing it down to 40 pages. That's going to be tough. I'm going to have to cut a lot. And I handed in both scripts to the first two issues. We didn't even know they were the first 2 issues at that point. It was just 2 issues. That's all it was. And then they got back to me and said, "We're going to launch the book with this story. We can add 10 pages to the first issue." And I said, "I really need 10 pages of the second issue, quite frankly, but okay," because I really did. And that was it. I added 10 pages to the first issue. It gave us a little more room to breathe. It gave Brett a little more big art to do. But I got 50 pages to tell it what was an 88-page story. And unfortunately, what I had to cut was a lot of the slower stuff, the developmental beats between the characters as they're coming to a realization of who they are to each other and what they might mean to each other moving forward to the future. All of that, I can't give too much away. I don't know when this is airing, but the second issue is not out yet. So I don't know if you guys are running this before the second issue comes out or after the second issue comes out. So that makes a difference in how I can talk about it.
So I have to ask, who has the more complicated family tree, the Summers or Logan?
I don't know Logan's family tree well enough to tell it because anything that they've done with that was after I no longer was reading any of that stuff. I never even read that Wolverine origin story they did 20 years ago. The one that what was it called?
Yeah, I think it was Origins. I think Paul Jenkins did that one. Yeah.
Yeah. I never even read that, so I can't even tell you. I don't even know. I don't even know. just somebody told me his name is James Howlett, and I laughed, and that was it. So
Somebody put on Twitter yesterday, and I got stark raving mad that James Howlett is Howlett the Moon, and that's his name.
it probably is, to tell you the truth. So I can't tell. So I would imagine that Scott's is only because I don't know what Wolverine's is. So there. I can only really imagine that any Inhumans character has a much more convoluted one because they've been inbreeding for the last 3,000 years.
So you mentioned Juggernaut, a series that you're writing as well, who is one of the most fascinating villains / anti-heroes / characters of the X universe while not being a mutant himself. Is it challenging writing right now with an X adjacent book in this Krakoa era?
It was one of the main reasons I said yes immediately. I told you that I don't say yes that often that quickly, but this was an interesting. In September of 2019, I, the week after Labor Day was a really, really exciting week for me. That's when an agent told me that they were going to represent my book. That that's when um, I signed I think they signed the contract for the second season of Outrage. That's when an animation Bible was greenlit for completion, which meant I would, I got a bigger paycheck for finishing the animation Bible. And then a Marvel editor calls me up for the first time in like 2 years outside of Custom Comics and offers me a Juggernaut miniseries. Not even pitching for a Juggernaut miniseries because I wouldn't have done that. Just offers me the Juggernaut miniseries. To this day I've never asked Jordan why he offered it to me, but he did. And I had just finished reading the initial Hickman miniseries that had come out that summer, and I really was fascinated by the entire setup that they were doing. I thought it was crazy, wild, interesting, fun. And I said to Jordan, he's not allowed on Krakoa though, because at that time humans weren't going to be allowed on Krakoa that early in the ball game. And Jordan said exactly that's why it'll be interesting. What does he do? And I said yes, totally. Um, and before he hang, and I said, let me think about it. I'll put together a 5-issue synopsis. And before he hangs up, before I hang up, he goes, "Oh yeah, and by the way, the last time he appeared, he had the gem ripped out of his body, and he was relegated to limbo." And I'm like, "What?" Click, and the phone hangs up. Oh crap. And I try to avoid that kind of continuity now because nobody else respects it enough to try to bridge those gaps between what happened and where you are when you start something again. But I'm not that kind of writer, so I looked at what happened. They sent me the issues, and I said, okay, this is even better because not only is he no longer going to be allowed on Krakoa after he'd been redeeming himself as a member of the X-Men, but he doesn't have his powers, and his powers are everything to him because he's absolutely nothing without his powers. He's like, and he knows he's nothing without his powers. Because I wrote that already. I wrote a miniseries called X-Men Forever in the early aughts that half of Juggernaut's appearances in that book while they were bouncing back through time was him in jail, stranded in another dimension, or in a block of cement. So every time he woke up in a specific time period, he realized what an absolute loser he was because he wasn't able to participate in what was going on because he was out of commission. So I felt very comfortable getting back to that character, and in many ways, without having read all of the appearances he's had between then and now, I felt like it was a kind of natural continuation of how I set him up at the end of X-Men Forever. And so long as I wasn't contradicting any established continuity, which I wasn't, I could in my mind just pick up the redemption flow straight from there. And that's kind of what I did. And getting an artist like Ron Garney really helps because getting an artist like Ron Garney means you're going to have really effing fantastic artwork, um, which makes you enthusiastic about doing the work too. Ron didn't come aboard till I'd already finished scripting issue 2, but it made a huge difference in my enthusiasm to really bear down and have really tightly controlled stories. I knew I wanted to do 5 self-contained stories with running subplots, I did that as much to challenge myself as anything, because after writing so many comics, I want to make it, interesting for me to do. So I liked it. I'm pretty happy with it. I haven't read it as a whole yet. I've read them all as individual issues. Um, I'm actually going to read it as a whole when I get the trade paperback, so that'll be in a few months. Because I'm curious to see how it reads as a whole versus how it read as individual issues. Because quite frankly, I structured them as individual issues. But I liked it a lot. He's a great character. I really enjoy him a lot, and hopefully I'll get to write him again a lot sooner than you expect.
Now, you have been writing comic books for a hot second now. How has writing in the industry changed? How does it compare now to the earlier days of your career in the business?
It's it's way too hard to really break down in a from a single person's point of view. I think it really requires roundtable discussions to really get a feel for how different people's interpretations of it are. I think that there's a kind of a cause and effect. The audience that you're writing for tells you the kind of book they want, and you then write that kind of book for them, which means that you're writing it's kind of a snake eating its own tail in a way. And I don't say that negative. I don't say that as a disparagement. I mean, we wrote books that were supposed to be read by people ages 8 to 80. That was the joke that Tom DeFalco would always say. And you'd be like, that's one hell of a long stretch of a rubber band, isn't it? But the idea was that an 8-year-old can be reading an issue of X-Men or Marvel or Spider-Man, and so could a 38 or 48 or 58. You know, um, I sincerely doubt that there's a single writer writing for Marvel or DC right now on their regular line of titles that even conceives of an 8-year-old reading their book. Um, even cares about an 8-year-old reading their book. Unfortunately, I think that the books are all being written for uh, for readers who know all the tropes of all the characters, and as a result, there's a self-fulfilling maturation of the medium that does no longer allow for fun and rarely allows for bombast and excitement. Everything is measured and metered by experience. You have experience as a reader having read it. I have experience as a writer having written it already. So let's dispense of the 6 pages of action. Let's just show the ramifications of that action and then have all the characters talk about it. Because ultimately, ever since Marvel switched to full script, it became quite a masturbatory writer's medium. And I've lost count of the number of pages that I see in books now that are nothing more than a character talking to a reader. It's an empty panel of just a character talking. 9 panel grids, 6 panel grids, whatever. I think I read 2 pages of that last night in some. Um, and that's completely antithetical to the kind of writing that we were encouraged, trained, and taught to do when I broke in '85. Um, and again, a lot of that is because of the audience expectations and demands. So I read a lot of reviews of the X-Men Legends book, and really was enjoying the hell out of reading them. We just dive right into action, and there's so much action in this book, and I'm just thinking to myself, yeah, so what? So you've seen action a million times before, so you're bored by the action, but you're gonna sit here and tell me that you haven't seen characters talking to a camera 1,000 times in the last 20 years, and you're not bored by that? I mean, so to me, it's masturbatory writing for masturbatory readers, and that is a disparagement. I do say that in a disparaging way. But I understand why it's being done, because the readers want to justify why they're still reading this crap at age 50. and the writers want to justify why they want to pretend that it's an advanced intelligentsia medium. Every generation wants to do wants to do one step more than the generation before in terms of whether it be violence or language or theme or subject matter or approach. And this current generation of writers have all grown up in an age where talking was showing. And we grew up in an age where showing was showing. And as a result, comics talk about a lot of stuff. Mainstream superhero titles talk about a lot of stuff, but they rarely show a lot of stuff.
So let's transition to your upcoming novel.
Oh, something positive. Thank you, because I was just a total Debbie Downer for you guys. Wow, what a bitter,
Well,
complaining old man. He's really not. He just, doesn't feel the need to have characters stare out a window at the rain for 9 panels.
well, I will second what you're saying too, because my son is 11 and he is big into superheroes. It's a bond that we share. We go to our LCS together and we pick up Amazing Spider-Man books and titles that he's interested in, and he'll get on my Marvel Unlimited and he'll read a couple of issues, but then he'll just be overwhelmed by all these things, and like he'll just like, well, I'm just going to go back and watch Steven Universe, or I'm just going to watch anime, something that he can easily and readily pick up, versus comics. So I tend to agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, the language has gotten a lot more complicated. Take a look, objectively the next time you read 10 books and count how many of them are telling a linear story versus how many of them have constant cutaways, then, now, 4 days ago, present, and they picked it up from TV writing, and TV started doing it as a way to create a false illusion of drama that would drag you through the first 40 minutes before you got to the high point of drama. Usually you would start and build to that drama, but they decided, because there was so much television and you've seen so much television, let's show you the drama up front and then flash back to how we got there. And TV started doing that a lot in the aughts, and comics then started doing it a lot too, because a lot of the writers were drawing on TV tropes. We didn't used to draw on TV tropes back then. We drew on comic book tropes, and 9 times out of 10, that was linear storytelling. You just progress your story in regular time from the beginning to the end, or the cliffhanger or whatever. But they don't. I didn't do it either, by the way, in Juggernaut. So I'm not immune to doing that same kind of thing. I'm just citing it and explaining it as an example. And I think that's very hard for 10, 11-year olds to really hang on to. I think linear storytelling is important to that age, because their brains haven't yet developed the storytelling function that allows them to be able to juggle the time elements and the time frames that a story is being told inside their head and keep it straight. So they get confused, they get bored, and they walk away. It's understandable. I'm not the brightest bulb in the world. I'd walk away from it too if I was 25 years old, much less 11 years old. You know?
Yeah, for sure. I can't get him to sit down for 20 minutes and do homework. So how can I get him to bounce around all those complex?
Well, some teacher you are. You're really painting yourself out as teacher of the year and can't get his own kid to do homework.
Well, I teach related arts, so I do that by choice. So
there you go. So where were we? My novel, my book, my hoity-toity entree into the world of literature.
yeah, so with an impending so it's definitely got an impending purchase for me, just because the title is Suburban Dicks alone. So tell us everything.
Fair enough reason that you can pre-order it now, by the way, just so you know. A little boy named Fabian in 1994 had an idea for a book that had a beginning, middle, and end, and the characters all fleshed out. And 17 years later, he got like the confidence to do it, so he did it. And that's kind of the story. I've had this book in mind for 25 plus years. It was born. Inspiration was born out of some issues that the community I lived in was having with an outdoor gun club. an indoor-outdoor gun club that was close enough to our community that occasionally they'd miss their target berms and we'd have bullets lob our way. So we were trying to fight them in the town council to get them to stop outdoor shooting. They're allowed to continue indoor shooting, but not outdoor shooting. Now, mind you, the gun club had been there for 50 years, and all these developments were all being built on former farmland, including the one I had moved into. Um, and we lost the battle in the town council. We lost by one vote, and I just thought to myself, man, I'd love for these guys to shut down. It would be wonderful if something could shut them down. And I'm a writer, so like let's say I was a mob guy, I would have hired someone to burn the place down. You know what I mean? But I'm not a mob guy. I'm a writer, so I came up with a fictional story where the gun club would get their comeuppance, and that quickly evolved in my head into something where the gun club was just a tiny little minor part of the whole thing, you know? But that was the inspiration for the book, getting comeuppance. What if something they did years ago was found out now and it caused enough repercussions that it would shut them down? And what if they killed someone and buried the body? That was it. There it was. That was the inspiration for the book. And I just never had the confidence to write it. And and in 2017, toward the end of the year, I'd had a really good year and I wanted to try something different. And I told my wife, I'm going to try writing a book. I got no idea if I'm going to be able to finish it. I got no idea if it's going to be good. I got no idea if I'm going to be able to sell it. And even if I do sell it, it'll probably be to a mystery paperback company and it'll sell for $5,000 or $10,000. And it might take me almost a year to do it. And she's like, you're really not doing a good job selling this. and and I said, I just got to give it a shot. And she said, okay. So I just tinkered away on it all through 2018. It was never my primary focus. Paying work and scheduled work was always my primary focus. So there were some times where I'd go a week or two without writing anything, um, and I just got through it. And it was also a hard year for me in 2018 because I lost my mom, my dog, and my dad in that order within 6 months. So so it was fun. And that derailed me a few times, but I finally finished it in early 2019. Hired an editor to read it and give me feedback on how to cut it because I knew it was way too long. And she gave me her thoughts, and they were really good, cogent notes. So I cut. I acquired an agent as a result of business contacts I had, and he really liked the idea of the book a lot. Um, and when I submitted it to the agency, he read it, and a group of his people read it, and they loved it, and came back to me with uh, some ideas to do some changes and to cut. So I cut some more. The original manuscript was like 540 pages. I think the manuscript I delivered to the publisher was 390. So that gives you an idea how much I cut. A- and um, and that was it. He took it out in November of 2020. Um, and we had five publishers who wanted to buy it, which was astonishing to me. It was the most fun I've had as far as being a professional writer since the early 90s, working on all the X books and all those sales and the numbers that we were getting. To have five publishers all bidding on a book, and two of them dropped out pretty quick, but then three stayed in the bidding for a week, and then it was down to two publishers, and that turned into a two-book offer because each of them were trying to sweeten the deal. So all of a sudden, I wasn't just selling one book; I was getting a guarantee of a second book in the deal. Um, and I ended up making the choice to go with Putnam Publishing, which is a division of Penguin Random House, because when I got out of college in 1983, my first job was working for Putnam Berkeley Publishing before they were purchased by Penguin Random House. I worked for Berkeley Publishing, which was the paperback book division, and Putnam was our hardcover book division. So that was my first job out of college, and part of me thought the editor involved has a really good reputation. The company is part of Penguin Random House, so it's big, strong conglomerate with ins into the bookstores, etc. But I like kind of the story to tell that I'm writing a book for the company I worked for out of college, and that was the backstory that got us to the book. And Suburban Dicks is a sarcastic murder mystery. It is set in the towns where I live in, which is the Princeton area in New Jersey, West Windsor, Plainsboro, Lawrenceville, this whole little area that I've been in for 30 years. Um, it is about a 34-year-old should have been FBI profiler who is pregnant with her fifth child. Her first child, who is about 10 or 11, is the reason why she didn't become an FBI profiler because she got pregnant at the end of her senior year in college. And she has been unfulfilled in her life ever since because she should have been solving murders. She solved a murder in high school and she solved a massive serial killer uh, murder in New York City in college. So it's what she should be doing because she's really good at it, and she hasn't done it. Um, and the secondary lead, and her name's Andrea Stern. And the secondary lead is a reporter named Kenny Lee. And Kenny won a Pulitzer Prize when he was in college for breaking a story that tore down the administration of the New Jersey governor and eventually led to the resignation of the New Jersey governor. Now, 10 years later, Kenny Lee is working for a weekly suburban newspaper in his hometown. And that tells you a story of how Kenny Lee crumbled in the last 10 years. So Kenny and Andrea knew each other. He's younger, but he's 29, she's 34. They knew each other because she used to date his older brother in high school. And he was always secretly in love with her back then, but he was a little kid. And the two of them get together and try to solve the murder of a gas station attendant in a West Windsor gas station that Andy suspects goes beyond robbery or beyond just the murder of the gas station attendant. She thinks he was killed because there are people trying to cover something else up. The question is, what is it that they're trying to cover up? And the cover up dates back to something that happened 50 years ago, and the police, aspects of the police department and aspects of the township government have been involved in the cover up generationally now for 50 years. And she starts to uncover all of that along with Kenny. And that's it. It's a little bit of a look at the changes in suburban demographics. I live in an area that is like 80% Asian, Indian, and Chinese, Korean, Pakistani. And in 1989 or 1990, it was about 45% Asian or 40% Asian, you know? So there's been a demographic shift that has happened in my town, that I've watched happen all around me because I've been here for so long. And the stories, themes, and subtext are really about white fear of change and white flight from change, and what we do to try to maintain an illusion of a status quo that feels safe to us. So there are all these underlying themes to the book that I'm really happy that they played out strongly. The readers who've read it all see it, all get it, but it's all within the veneer of a pretty fast moving, sarcastically funny kind of a tone to the whole thing. So if you've read my comics over the last 35 years, you'll see it's me. You know, you'll see all of me in it. It's got a lot of my observational, sarcastic nature. I call the narrative voice omniscient snark. Um, and the editor, everyone who's read it has been really, really supportive and positive about it. I'm really happy. I'm very surprised, pleasantly so, because as a writer, most times I just shrug my shoulders and go, I hope it doesn't suck too much. So I was really, really happy to hear so many people come back to me and say, no, my friend, it doesn't suck at all. It's really good. And I just finished the second manuscript a couple months ago, and I delivered it to the editor yesterday, last week. What's today? Tuesday? I think I delivered it to the editor last Tuesday, so a week ago. And now I'm in the same kind of limbo, which is waiting to hear what they think of the second book. It's the same characters. It's still going to be, it's a different title for the book, but it's going to be subtitled The Suburban Dicks Mystery. And I hope it sells well enough that I get to do more. We have a TV option on it, but I can't announce it yet with who it's with. But we're gonna start talking to showrunners real soon, potential showrunners real soon, and I hope that it gets picked up as a TV show because I think it would make a really, really good TV show, like on a streaming platform. And TV shows tremendously help the sales of the book, which means I maybe get to do more because I would like to keep doing more. If I can do this through my 60s into my early 70s, I'd be really, really happy. I'm 59 this year and turning 60 at the end of the year. So to me, it's a great kind of last act to my career. Something completely different than what I'd done before, but it still feels very much a part of me.
So you said completely different, which brings us to our next question. What to you are sort of the principal differences between writing a novel and writing comics?
That's a great question. I haven't written enough novels to really feel comfortable being able to answer it without sounding like a total douche. I've only written 2 books. I, I I think what I've tried to do is draw from the strength of comic writing to help me with my prose writing, and that has really benefited me, I think, with my dialogue, with my brevity of scene location descriptions, which helps a lot because too many writers get lost in describing minutia that doesn't really advance the story. So it just, it just kind of makes it, again, it's a, you're chasing your own tail when you're doing that. And it really has helped me tremendously with my ability to pace my chapters. So my chapters are brisk and solid, but almost always end on a good cliffhanger that makes you want to read the next chapter. And that's really important for book reading, especially for semi mystery books. And I don't even think of myself as a mystery writer because I don't think I am. The mystery is really just the cause that gets you through the narrative from point A to point Z. To me, I'm an observationist, so I'm trying to make observations about humanity and our world. And since my world is suburban life, that's what I'm focusing on. So I get to do a little more of that in the book than I get to do in comics. It's not, the prose isn't heavy prose. I try not to because I used to try to do that whenever I did try to write prose in the last 25 years. One reason it took me so long to write this book is because I was never happy with anything I wrote. I just thought it was pretentious drivel. It just sounded like bad, watered down versions of other writers. So I'm trying to mimic Stephen King instead of trying to write me. And my favorite was trying to mimic this tone and style of someone like James Ellroy. And I reread what I like 20 pages I wrote, and I was like, oh my god, this is this is the worst James Ellroy ever. How does James Ellroy do it? And then I realized, wait, I'm getting a little bored with James Ellroy because he's overdoing it. Okay, I get it. It took me a long time to cut out all of the pretensions out of what I thought a book should be and just write what I felt like writing and how I felt like writing it. And I don't want to overwrite. I want it to be entertaining. I want it to be brisk. I want anything that leaves you thinking. I'd rather that be after the fact, not during the process. You know what I mean? So I think that I think in the first book, and even more so in the second book, because the second book's themes are about marriage and suburban coexistence between husbands and wives, and the never-ending, stultifying boredom and repetition of suburban life. And since I'm 59 years old, I have about 54 years of experience of still defying existence of suburban life. So there's a couple people already told me that the second book is depressing as hell, but also brilliant. So I was pretty happy about that because I think it is depressing as hell, and I hope it's brilliant. Because she's not in a good marriage, the main character. One of the main reasons she's not who she should be is because her husband has been afraid of letting her be that, and he's always been able to use the the uh, the easy pull of, well, we have four kids to raise, and we have a house to maintain, and I'm going to work. You have all this to do, and that's not fulfilling to her, which I understand, so it's about her having to get through. The first book is about her coming to the realization that this is who she should be. She should be someone who is solving problems, murders, crimes, whatever. That's just in her DNA. And the second book is about her coming to terms that in order for her to be who she needs to be, she may not be able to ever become that as long as she's married to this man. So that's so there is that kind of sad, tragic through thread to the whole second book. So the differences are that you get to explore a character more in depth in a book, but conversely, a book is a self-contained unit, and I got to explore Baron Zemo for 75 issues in a comic book. You know what I mean? So it's if you read 75 issues in a row of Thunderbolts, you're going to see a tremendous kind of character arc for Zemo. You know what I mean? So that's no different than a novel in and of itself. It's just told in a different way. Um, so I just I did approach the book differently than I would a comic book. It's not as visual a medium, obviously, and I didn't try to describe things that should be visually connoted in your mind overly much, because I thought that I don't think that's a strength of mine to try to do that. It's funny, I'm rereading The Stand right now, and I'm realizing that Stephen King go on for 2-3 pages in this book describing a room, and you're like, I don't care, I'm done. Like, let's move on. I don't care what's in the room, because the room's not even going to matter in 2 chapters. They're not even going to be in the room in another chapter because they're leaving town. So what do I care what's in the room? So I didn't need to do that. I just wanted to make it a brisk, crisp, fast-paced book that had interesting underlying themes to it, and interesting characters, because I do think I have interesting characters. I think that my main characters are tremendously conflicted internally and externally, but they both approach it with kind of an arrogant snark to them that's both endearing and entertaining. Um, that's what I'm trying to do, and I want to do more of it because I like it, quite honestly. It's fun. It's a different kind of fun than writing comics or writing video game crap or writing academic crap for intellectual property management that I've done also. But at the end of the day, you're still your fingers still have to hit the keys and the letters still have to form words. So it's all writing one way or the other.
So you have teased us a little bit about future projects. So I'm gonna pivot a little bit and amend my next question. As the co-creator of Deadpool, you're now celebrating the 30th anniversary of the character. What is the thing, looking back, that you're most proud of such a popular character that you had your hands on?
Ultimately, probably the fact that I gave him the conflicted tragedy that led to the depth the character has to appeal to people. So by giving him the cancer that led him to to try to get rid of the cancer, that led him to successfully getting rid of the cancer at the cost of his humanity. Ultimately, that tragedy helps make him Bugs Bunny meets Frankenstein's monster, and I brought that to him, so I'm pretty proud that that ultimately is what resonates with fans of the character tremendously more than how he looks or what he does, and often even more so than what he says, because it's the underlying tragic conflict of the character that makes his humor so much more potent and so much more vibrant. And that's what nearly all of the readers get out of it. I'm pretty happy. I'm pretty proud of that. And from a comic book standpoint, getting him to wear Marvel Girls 1960s miniskirt costume in Cable and Deadpool really ranks right up there too, because thank God for Patrick Zerker, because I wanted to have him wear the costume for that entire storyline. And he said, "There's no way I'm drawing him in this for the entire storyline. You have all this serious stuff going on with Cable. You cannot have this guy do this for 3 issues." And I'm like, "All right." Patrick was willing to draw him in the costume for like 3 pages, and that was it. And his call was a 1,000% right, because that made it even sweeter. And just that tantalizing glimpse of Panty we got was just phenomenally entertaining and enjoyable. All of it worth it. 30 years of writing, 35 years of writing, all boiled down to we got a tantalizing glimpse of Deadpool's Marvel girl costume panties. There you go.
I have to say this as well. My other son is 9 now, and he's on the spectrum, and autism is a wild ride, and he was nonverbal for the first like 3 to 3.5 years of his life, and one of the first things that he really gravitated towards and fixated on was Deadpool. So thank you for burgeoning something in him to really make
Sure,
him come out of his shell.
there's nothing. I can't be any prouder of anything other than introducing Deadpool to 9-year-olds. My God, another the teacher's here. No homework. 9-year-olds reading Deadpool. For the love of God, man.
Now we typically end our show with what we like to call our nerd commendations. Do you have any particular pieces of nerd media that you're currently enjoying that you could nerd commend to our audience?
Oh boy, well, WandaVision has been great. I've really liked it from the very beginning, and I think I'm really curious how they're going to wrap all this up in the last episode. I hope they wrap a lot of it up. I hope they don't leave 90% of it dangling. But I think it's been a tour de force for the actors, especially, and it's really great to get to see really good actors, of which Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany certainly are, and Catherine Hahn. It's really good to get to see them showing so many sides of their skill set. It's kind of cool. And they don't actors don't often get a chance to do that kind of thing. It's super surprising to get to see them do that kind of thing in a superhero show. I am probably so ridiculously over the top excited about the Falcon and Winter Soldier show that's going to come on next, that I am almost am engorged right now thinking. So I can't wait, because Captain America: Winter Soldier is my favorite of the Marvel movies by far, and I'm really looking forward to seeing these characters together. I did my perfunctory, painful watching of the newest episode of Walking Dead that just came out on Sunday. Um, I feel like I'm in Lost territory now, because I watched all 7 seasons of Lost and I hated it for 6 of those seasons. So I'm at the point now with Walking Dead where I feel I'm only watching it to punish myself. um, but I do keep watching it. What else? What else nerdy? What else nerdy? I am reading. I'm usually pretty far behind on my superhero stuff because I read it on a digital library app. So oftentimes it takes Marvel or DC a year or so to load some of the books into it. Um, I am reading Infamous Iron Man by Bendis and Malieve right now. I'm on the second trade paperback. There's only 2 loaded in the app. I'm not sure if there were more than that or not. I am enjoying the living daylights out of it, and I'm actually kind of surprised that I am. I think it's a super interesting exploration of Victor Von Doom in a very different way, and I'm pretty happy with what both Bendis and Malieve are doing with it. And that book came out like what, 4 years ago or something? I don't even know.
It's always one that I meant to read. Just the concept of Doctor Doom as Iron Man is fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. It's just, look, it's got some flaws in it. I am of 2 minds on Bendis. Uh, I've come to appreciate him later in his career, because I wasn't happy when I first read his Avengers work, but then I did, in fairness to him, go back and reread and read all of his Avengers work. I basically I quit the book when he had an issue with like 7 splash pages of lightning coming to Earth or something like that. Having lived through the new universe once, I didn't need to relive it through it again in a book I was paying money for. So I quit Avengers that way back when, and but then I read them all and read his Daredevil, and I always liked his Daredevil even when I wasn't liking the Avengers. So he's an interesting writer. It just depends on the book. Um, and there's been a bunch of his stuff I've read that I've been, oh, okay, it's all right but not great, and there's a bunch of his stuff I've read that I thought this is fantastic. Invincible Iron Man to me is just one of those that it falls into the so unexpected that it's the perfect thing for him. You know, he's like the perfect choice to be writing this book about this character at this time in the character's evolution. So I recommend it because it's I don't know how it's going to pay off. I'm only at the very beginning of the second trade paperback now, so I can't guarantee you that the last few issues are going to pay off, but the first 6, 7 or so have really paid off well for me, the reader. And I think that's pretty much it right now. I watch so much it slips through my mind. It kind of bleeds through. I nerdy stuff. I like Mandalorian tremendously, and I'm not a big Star Wars fan in the least. I did not like Wonder Woman 84. I was very disappointed by it. But I like all the actors. I just didn't like the movie. Um, what else? What else? I've been watching the Titans show on HBO Max. Um, I'd seen the first season only because I was in Mexico City for a convention right before COVID shut us all down, and you could watch Titans on Netflix International, but you couldn't watch Titan on Netflix Domestic US. So because it was international, I downloaded a bunch of the first season episodes and was watching them. And then the minute the plane takes off from Mexico City, I was watching an episode that I had downloaded, and the download ends in the middle. It stops abruptly because you've left Mexican airspace into international or domestic U.S. space, and the download actually knew that. Don't ask me how, but I was in. So in essence, I had to wait until just more recently when HBO Max loaded it all. I'm watching the show, but it's not a binge for me because I'm not enjoying it enough to binge it. But because it's Dick Grayson, I have to watch it and see what the hell they do with Dick Grayson. And so far, I've yet to see the Dick Grayson I know, but I'm hoping maybe one day the episodes will show me the Dick Grayson I know. Um, the next joke this Dick Grayson cracks on this show will probably be the first one he cracks. It's just far too dour and fake important, fake gnarly. The characters cursing, all that stuff just bores the living daylights out of me. So ultimately, the show is boring the living daylights out of me. I wish it weren't, but I'm gonna keep watching it. I'm just not binging it. That's kind of it right now, as far as nerdy stuff, comic book wise and sci-fi wise. You know, I'm reading. I'm rereading The Stand, which I haven't read in years, decades even. I've read it 2 or 3 times when I was younger, but I haven't read it in over 25, 30 years, I think. And I'm finding it problematic to tell you the truth, but I'm gonna finish reading it. And I've been getting into Michael Connelly's Bosch books for the first time. I like the Bosch TV show tremendously, but I'd never read the books, and I'm now little by little starting to read the books again, or starting to read the books for the first time, I should say, from the beginning. Like I'm trying to read them in order. Uh, so that's it. That's where I'm at right now.
Well, Fabian, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for dealing with all of our snafus and tech problems and taking
They were
time out of your
my
day.
snafus. I want it on the record, guys. It was not your snafus. It was my snafu singular. I'm almost sure of it now. You guys did nothing wrong. Do not fall on that grenade, boys. It was me. It was all me.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, be sure to click the pre-order button for Suburban Dicks coming out in June, correct?
June 22nd it comes out. You can go to Amazon or Books A Million or Walmart or Barnes and Noble. Any sites have it already ready for pre-order.
All right, pre-order Suburban Dicks. be sure to check out Juggernaut and X-Men Legends. And Adam X is suddenly relevant again. Thank you so much, Fabian.
My pleasure, guys. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot for the time.
Well, thank you so much again to Fabian Nicieza for taking time out of his busy schedule to speak with us and to nerd out for a good amount of time. And be sure to pre-order Suburban Dicks. That'll be coming out June 22nd. So be sure to check that out. Very, very fascinating premise there. After this, our final break, we're going to hit you with 2 more nerd commendations. Welcome back, nerds, for our final segment, Nerd Commendations. Dave, we could probably talk about this for an hour, but what is your nerd commendation for this week?
Did I mention in this episode yet that I'm a huge Superman fan? I feel like I mentioned that a lot. So it really shouldn't come as a surprise that I would want to talk about the new CW superhero show, Superman and Lois. First, is it good? The answer is yes, which is why I'm nerd commending it. It is, however, a qualified yes. Is this the perfect Superman, the show I've been waiting for? Probably not. It's still much better than it has any right to be. The story takes place later in Superman's life. He's married to Lois, and they have 2 teenage sons, Jordan and Jonathan. A tragedy brings the family to Smallville, where they decide to stay for the good of the family. Turns out, there's trouble in paradise. Superman is gone a lot and misses much of his sons' lives. Jonathan seems well adapted enough, but Jordan struggles with social anxiety disorder. Add to that a mysterious new villain, and a real estate developer buying up land in Smallville, and Superman has his hands full. A lot of people argue that Superman is boring, and I have multiple times on this podcast argued against that. The notion that he's too powerful. The best Superman stories go beyond his powers. They face him with dilemmas where his powers cannot solve the problem. And Superman and Lois gets this right. It recasts Superman in a family drama, essentially. Sure, they are still superheroics, but the family dynamics, Superman struggling to be a good father and husband, those are the linchpins of drama here. And they work extremely well. I've made no secret out of how much I loved the rebirth era of Superman in the comics, that fun family dynamic it created. This is not exactly that, but it is much closer than I anticipated. Now, Tyler Hoechlin is fantastic in the role of Superman. He radiates warmth as Superman and has this great aw shucks nerdiness as Clark. It simply works. I enjoy his performance a great deal. Elizabeth Tulloch is great as Lois Lane as well, bringing some of that biting sarcasm and strength the character should have. I won't deny that there are some Zack Snyder-ish elements to the show, particularly how it's shot visually. Here I like it a lot better, though, because the presentation of Superman himself isn't so dour. I do wish the suit's colors weren't quite as washed out as they are, but that's really a minor quibble. Overall, the show captures Superman's character well so far. I wish there was a little more Superman in the Superman show, admittedly, and the focus on teen drama, the bread and butter of the CW for many years, doesn't entice me all that much. The family dynamic, though, is interesting. And I see potential for the teenage characters to grow beyond a sort of one-note CW portrayal. It's also really interesting to see them trying to tackle mental health in a much more relevant and respectful way than I think I've seen in superhero stories, at least mainstream superhero stories, in quite a while. So count me as cautiously optimistic about this one. I could have used a little bit more of that wonderful opening montage and the suit inspired by the Fleischer cartoons, to be honest. So this is far from the perfect Superman show, at least so far, but there's potential here, anchored by strong performances and a likable and dare I say recognizable Superman. It would be very difficult for me to picture this Superman trying to snap somebody's neck, for example. So as of this point right now, I'm in. I'm really enjoying this.
Just to preface before I go on with my thoughts, Dave, have you seen the second episode?
I have not. I've only seen the pilot so far.
I liked the show after the first episode, and I like it even more after the second. So I had my reservations going in with the CW being attached, I cannot bring myself to go back to the CW shows for the elements that you referenced, the teenage drama. It really just takes me out. With particularly with Arrow and the Flash, that the ones that I just can't get back into after I initially liked them, because it's so samey, with like the dramatic, ground. It feels like they have to remember where they are, and like, remember, this is a CW show, so you're gonna have to drag some love triangle type stuff back into it, and it's just irritating. But I thought that I was able to muscle through it in the first episode, and I think it's really hitting its stride in the second episode, and particularly it leans into those strong elements of the family drama. Second episode is a great feature for Lois, and this is a character that I'm very, very new to, but based on discussions that we've shared and the readings that you've recommended to me, it's kind of an MJ type quality, where she is strong enough of a character on her own, being non superpowered, and they give her some really nice room to breathe and feature here. I wholeheartedly second Tyler Hoechlin, his portrayal as Clark Kent and Superman. He really comes off, and I really have been able to pinpoint it, why I appreciate like the duality of Clark Kent versus Superman, and it's one of the characters that's nearest and dearest to my heart, and I've geeked out on this episode, and that's Zorro, and the if you've actually read the book, The Curse of Capistrano, the duality of Don Diego de la Vega, where he plays this bumbling socialite who has no interest in anything dramatic, and he's just so conversely different in his public persona that you believe it. And so like, it's always a joke that like, how can you not tell that Superman is Clark Kent? But Hoechlin does a really good job of serving up the two different personas in here, and it makes it believable. And one thing that I also appreciate, and you touched on this, was the mental health aspect. And it wasn't just like, oh, this is how kids are nowadays. And this is probably just a personal connection as a father, and, even further as a father of teenagers. Like, I can really feel this connection. And I think that's probably the biggest, recommendation that I can make, this commendation that I can make of this show, is the way that they tackle, like you said, his powers as Superman don't help him necessarily being a father. Like, they don't show you the right way to deal with, the struggles of being a father, and to being, having to be an absentee father because you're saving the world. And I also appreciate much more in the second episode the relationship between the two twins that they have for each other. I was a bit worried, with the depiction of Jonathan in the first episode, that we were going to have another stereotypical all-American macho man, and then Jordan was going to be like the nerdy one. But episode 2 fleshed out a lot of their relationship a lot more, and I really, really appreciated that. And I'm excited to see where this show goes. It's the one CW DC show that I can stomach. Even if they have, some economic anxiety ridden, small town Americana residents that are all A-okay with big corporations coming in and taking over their town. That's a bit annoying, but I'm a fan of the show.
Yeah, I can totally echo that. It's a great start. And really, I cannot say enough, the more I think about it, about the portrayal of Lois Lane in this show. I'm actually a big fan of Amy Adams. I don't think Lois Lane was probably the best role for her, but I really, really enjoy her acting. But one of the things I found regrettable about the big screen Lois is that spunk, that drive, that big heart, but at the same time, that hard-headedness seems to have kind of sort of faded in the background on the big screen. And here, it's much more on display. And this is sort of the Lois that I've always appreciated the most in the comic book. So I'm a big fan.
Yeah, and I will totally second that, because like, my exposure to Lois Lane has consisted of Amy Adams and Terry Hatcher, where they're just like, oh, damsel in distress all the time. Margot Kidder, I've seen Superman 78 once, so it's not resonant enough in my brain. But when I saw this, I'm like, oh my God, this is what Dave was talking about. It's like when I was reading All-Star Superman, and like, yeah, this is the badass woman who is going to stick it to the man. Like, this is what I was waiting for.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm hoping that they continue to grow this show in the right direction. In the meantime, Kris, you're bringing me back to the X-Men. What have you got for us?
Okay, so I know that you have struggled to jump into the Dawn of X and the complexity of Krakoa, but I really think that this this particular title, while it takes place on Krakoa and it is in that entire world, I feel like you could read this independently and still enjoy it. So I'm recommending what I think is the best of the bunch of the X books right now on the stands, and that's Hellions. It's written by Zeb Wells with art by Steven Segovia. And here's the synopsis from the first trade paperback, which contains issues 1 through 4. Bad is the new good. When the new nation of Krakoa opened its doors to all mutants and forgave all past crimes, its leaders knew that they'd have to accept some of their worst foes into the fold. But they didn't plan for what to do with them. Not to worry, Mr. Sinister has plans for the troublemakers. Meet his new Hellions: Scalp Hunter, Wild Child, Empath, Nanny, Orphan Maker, Psylocke, and Havoc. Yes, the brother of Cyclops, Alex Summers. Under Sinister's direction, they are sure to become productive members of mutant society and the new mutant team that you're going to hate to love. Though right now the Hellions can barely keep from killing one another, let alone find a way to fit into Krakoan society. Of course, that might be just what Mr. Sinister is counting on when he sends them to clean up his messes. So this, for me, is essentially Marvel's Mutant Suicide Squad, and it's done so right. Wells's dialogue, it's smart, it's witty, it's snarky as hell. Like, it's so funny. It makes me laugh out loud reading it every issue. Mr. Sinister, Nathaniel Essex, to quote Tony Stark, is a full tilt diva, and he takes center stage in this title. Like, he is center stage, all the lights. He gets to just be ridiculously dramatic for no reason. And this is the glow up, as I've talked on X of Words, the glow up on Mr. Sinister in this title is real. So the best part of the series, in my opinion, is a divalicious showdown spectacular between Mr. Sinister and Jaime Braddock, who is the brother of Betsy Braddock, sometimes known as Psylocke, and Captain Britain, in which a deal between Sinister and Jaime can only be struck when Sinister surrenders his deliciously dramatic cape to Jaime in order to book safe passage through his kingdom of Avalon. So, like, you have these two really overly dramatic characters, and he said, basically it comes down to, I want your cape, and that's the only way that you can safely pass through my land. As the solicitation above suggests, you can't help but root for this merry band of misfit toys, the damaged goods, if you will. Except for Empath, he's literally the worst. But perhaps the best thing about this title is its feature of Psylocke, and I mean Quanon, not that body-snatching colonizer, Betsy Braddock. We're finally getting the chance to see Quanon shine in her own right without the shadow of Betsy looming over her after she occupied her body for over 30 years. Pound for pound, Hellions has easily been the best book to come out of the Dawn of X era. Each and every one of the now 10 issues has been a can't-miss laugh-out-loud adventure. So Hellions by Zeb Wells and Steven Segovia is my nerd commendation for this week. It is all the characters that you were like forgotten about over the continuity of X-Men, that you were like, how are they going to be able, they're awful, these are horrible individuals, how are they going to be able to coexist on this new normal in Krakoa? And this is the story of how.
Now, see, this sounds interesting to me, and you're exactly right. When I was reading the sort of the summary of the first trade for research purposes, I thought to myself, this is like Suicide Squad Krakoa edition. And it sounds great, but you also have me right. The Krakoa era of X-Men has not clicked with me yet. It's not quite what I'm looking for in an X-Men comic. Maybe this will be. I will say that I have nothing but respect for the Krakoa era, though. Even though I struggle as a reader to get into it, it's absolutely incredible to me how many X-Men adjacent books this approach has created. It's almost become a publishing line unto itself. And that's impressive, because it opened up a place for so many minor and side characters and giving them a chance to shine. I wished DC would make an effort to find a place for many of its B-list and C-list characters. Instead, we get about 8 billion Batman books every month. Here I am waiting for an elongated man detective comic book, for example. So I have nothing but respect for this approach to the X-Men. So this sounds interesting. I'm probably try to give it a shot, but man, that Krakoa connection, the main X books are so dense. I want to have fun reading comics, not feel like I'm doing homework.
Yeah, for nothing else, like the main reason that, aside from my fandom of being a mutant fan, is that I'm holding out hope that you'll somehow make that connection, is because this is such a paradigm shift of what the history of the X-Men has been. They're done begging humankind to stop, slaughtering them. Please stop killing us. And so they have had enough of that, and they have gone and created their own sovereign nation. And so instead of 30, 40, 50 years of the same old tropes, the same old story of we're just trying to live and stop being killed and stop fight, we're tired of fighting for a world that, to quote the always opening passage, that hates and fears us. We're just going to go do our own thing. And so you get to tell so many different stories and feature so many different characters because you're not running from humankind and constantly being massacred.
And right there, when you describe the baseline idea behind this run, I adore that. I adore the premise. The execution has yet to hook me, but the premise itself, I think, is fantastic.
I think, and I probably have told you this before, if you do the Hickman Marvel run, I think it will be very, very beneficial into like that whole kind of reset and the denseness, of Hickman as a writer. It's very like an intellectual. It's very like avant-garde. It's very like, I feel like I'm taking a graduate course and like this is like research material that I have to dive into. So it's not, I totally second what you're saying. I wholeheartedly agree. It is not something that you can easily just dive into, his type of writing in particular. All right, that wraps up our Nerd Commendations and another episode as a result of the Nerd Byword podcast. As always, we thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for listening to our ramblings. And a special thanks to Fabian Nicieza for joining us today in this special giant-sized episode of the Nerd Byword. As always, we would appreciate for you to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast app. You can also find us at nerdbyword.com. And if you're on an Apple device, make sure you leave us a 5-star review and rating if you feel so inclined.
And we want to hear from you and what you think of the pod. And if you have any feedback for us, you can find us on social media. We are on Twitter and on Instagram at Nerd Byword, on Facebook at The Nerd Byword. And of course, you can find us individually at That Nerd Kris and at That Nerd Dave.
And you can always interact with us Saturday nights at 10 p.m. Eastern for #DrunkPete, where we live tweet Spider-Man comics and just hang out and have a good time amongst nerds. But as always, stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez and show art by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.